Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 131. Haven is here. This is a podcast about The Division 2, its community, news, speculation, and updates. I am Bond Diesel. I do Division stuff such as this podcast, Twitch streams, and YouTube videos, mostly about Division 2. Please take a moment to subscribe and rate this podcast on whatever platform you listen to it on, as well as check me out on Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. This week, we will talk about Title Update 12, what's next for Division 2, we'll jump into the Division 3 speculation room, we'll talk about Cyberpunk and Haven, a new game that I really loved. I want to thank this month's Patreon supporters, Hassan, Christian, Darren, Tim, PK, Dale, and Ron. There are no more ads on this podcast, so if you're willing to support and help me keep this thing going as best we can, please check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/BondDiesel. If there's anything you request or would like to see to become or stay a patron, please let me know. I'm happy to do it. I'm just not very creative and I'm a little bit lazy. We do not have a state of the game this week. We are not expecting any for at least 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks. Massive is taking off. I believe they work this week, as in through the 18th, and then I believe they're off until at least the 4th. So no official news likely coming, and that's just something I'm gonna have to deal with. A couple things I do want to talk about before we jump into Division stuff is I want to talk about a new game that came out called Haven. That ended up being a game that on paper, it's a game that I shouldn't like because of much of the artistic style, the gameplay style, and really just the point of the game isn't typically what I get into, but I did. And in fact, it might be my favorite game of 2020. And I want to talk about why. So the reason I found out about this game, I wish I would have found out earlier and checked out the demo and maybe even tried to get like a review copy of it. The reason I found out is that Julian Garrity, to wrap this back around to Division, of course, his wife works for the company that made the game. They're called the Game Bakers. And they made a game called Fury a few years ago that I never heard of or played. I'm thinking about it because I did like the style of Haven. But this game, on paper, it's got like almost like an anime kind of style. It's like a action sort of turn-based combat type of game. It's extremely dialogue heavy and specifically deals with the relationship, the sometimes intimate relationship between a young guy and a young girl who have run off together. It just shouldn't have been a game I really cared about. And it's the first game since Red Dead 2 and maybe even since Hellblade that just had me just really gripped. And then when I finished it, just heartbroken that it was over. And it's kind of hard to explain why. So the good of the game, which is a lot in my opinion. While it's not the aesthetic I typically prefer, it is freaking gorgeous. The Game Bakers aren't a AAA studio, okay? So you kind of have to go into it kind of being okay with that. But I think they do a lot with their aesthetic and their style, where the game overall is very beautiful. There's definitely some kind of, there's some areas where it's a little rough, but overall it's a very pretty game to look at. And they use color and clashing colors and like contrast and stuff like that really well. And it's and as you go on, the environments that you play in are different and they change, and the way that happens is really cool. The movement takes some getting used to, and I've seen some people don't really like it. I got used to it and felt like I was able to adapt to it, and got to a point where I really actually kind of enjoyed the movement system. Your characters are using these kind of like anti-gravity boots to move around, and so here's one of the mechanics of the game is that you play like 95% of the game with your partner. That you don't just like pick one or the other. You technically can, but they're always together except for one small part of the game. But you should play it to find out what that is. And they're always moving in tandem. And what's so fun about the game, and I guess I'll move on to my favorite part while I'm also talking about movement, um, is that there's like a constant dialogue happening between the two characters. It gets a little repetitive eventually, but never really that bad. Um, there's a lot of payoffs with it. There's even like some really cute little things and that's not a word I typically say in this podcast, but like if you're flying like a certain direction for long enough, they'll like even up when they're both flying beside each other and like hold hands. Like I know it's stupid, but as you get into the story and you appreciate the relationship and you kind of see how they got there and stuff, there's like a bunch of little moments that happen where it's just like it's kind of like heartwarming. There's even a bunch of different animations where if you leave them idle, they'll just stand there, and then after 15-20 seconds, they'll one will like sit down and they'll start talking about stuff, or they'll like hug, or it's just, I promise, I know from just hearing me talk about it, it sounds like, God, Bon, what's happened to you? But it really was, it's the context that it all happens in. And then the story is really good. The story and the dialogue is the best part of this game. The actual gameplay is good, and it's fun to play. I'll get to that's also where the bad comes in, which I'll cover in a moment. The combat is, I guess, the thing I want to talk about before my favorite part. The combat you have to get used to. So I'm not a turn-based guy at all. I don't like the Final Fantasy games and stuff like that. So this game, it's combat. So you actually control both of the characters at the same time. So on the controller, you're using the D-pad and for me, Xbox, the XYBA controls, and those control each character. And so you're queuing up actions for them to do at the same time. And so they have like two different attacks, a block, and then like a pacify ability. So at any given time, on one of them you're setting up a block, on the other one you're setting up an attack, and then those things happen. So then you reverse it and you go. And as you get into it, and as they open up some abilities, they get more powerful as the game goes on. It becomes more fun, but then you hit some enemies that are really difficult and have some like mechanics that you need to figure out and how to defeat them. You can't just brute force the whole game. So the combat by the end I appreciated and enjoyed, but it definitely wasn't my favorite part. My favorite part of the game was easily the story and the dialogue. The two characters are Kay and Yu. Kay's the guy and Yu's the woman. And so the long story short, without giving away any spoilers, is they live in this alternate reality sci-fi universe where there's they live in this society that seems to be relatively peaceful and good, quote unquote, but has a bunch of kind of very over controlling laws and things like that. And one of the things is that it's kind of like a caste system, where like the kind of what you're born into is what you are. It almost has kind of like a Hunger Games feel to it, the world. And essentially what happened is these two individuals met, and a big part of the game is that there's a thing called a matchmaker on this planet, on this where they're from, that when you're born, you get match made with someone, and when you become of age, that's who you marry, and that's who you spend the rest of your life with. And these two people were not matched, and they meet and they decide that they're in love, and they take off from that planet and go to another planet that's abandoned to try to escape uh, what was going to be put on them, and they're living. And then what happens essentially is the authorities on that planet want to come get them. There's some, there's some depth to who these people are and stuff. But long story short, you play as these two people on this abandoned planet that was colonized by the same society, but it was abandoned. And you're learning why it was abandoned. You're learning what their people that they know from their planet had to do with it. And they're trying to make the planet habitable for themselves. Um, and all at the same time, they have an established relationship when the game starts, but they're going deeper into that, learning more about each other and stuff. It's just it's got this gameplay loop where you go out into the world, and essentially the world is a bunch of little islands that are all connected by these bridges, and you unlock the islands as you discover them, and you have to unlock them in certain ways through game mechanics. And essentially you have to visit all of the islands to collect all of a bunch of materials to fix your spaceship, to try to get like further away, or to truly escape your old planet, right? And that's what leads into the one part of the game I really didn't like, and I think it'll turn off a lot of people. So before you go and jump in and play it, if you can get past all the other stuff that I got past, um, the game is super duper grindy, in the sense that there's basically food and building materials that you have to get, and you can get them really easily. It's actually really easy to get them and collect them. The problem is that it's just still not. It's a bit much. Now, if you're listening to this and you're gonna go play this game, one thing that I think is good to know ahead of time is you will eventually, for me, I think is when I was about halfway through the game, realize that you can just kind of bust through the game if you don't want to do every single. Basically, a part of this is clearing this infection from each island, and you do it by collecting materials. What I realized about halfway through the game is that I thought you had to clear every island, and doing that was taking for freaking ever. And then I realized in hindsight, no, I ended the story with 5 times the materials I needed. So if you play this game, realize that you don't have to clear every island, and really, each clearing the islands is a lot more about discovering like little secrets and little side stories and stuff as you're doing the main quest, which is collecting parts to fix your ship. So if you check it out, just keep that in mind, that you don't have to farm as much as you think you do. But it's a game that there's only been a handful of games in my life that when the game was over, I like felt empty. It wasn't, and it's not, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It was and it's happened with multiple games. Like I said, Hellblade, Red Dead 1 and 2, and definitely a few other games in my life where I played them and I really liked them, and then I finished it, and then I was just like, oh, that was awesome. I wish there was more. And this game definitely fits into that. There is talk of some DLC or maybe even a sequel at the end of the credits when you finish the game. There is like a little like wink wink, like, oh, maybe we'll see you again, kind of a thing. And I really hope they do, because it was dope. It was a really fun game. Maybe it was because I had COVID when I played it, and I was thinking about life or whatever. I'm not really sure why I enjoyed it so much, other than what I've said. It's just a fun game to play. But a game I checked out mostly just because one of the people who made it was the wife of another game designer I like. It ended up being what made me my favorite game of the year. It's definitely worth it if you have Game Pass and you can play it for free. I want to say it's 20 or 30 bucks on other platforms. I would pay that to play it. If you're skeptical, if you aren't really sure, check out some videos. There's some videos of a demo and stuff. You can get a feel for the game and its style and stuff. If you think it might be your jam, I think it's worth that. But that's kind of up to you. The second topic is Cyberpunk, which has become a much bigger issue that I'm probably going to cover in full during this episode. But I do need to fill some time, so we'll see. So my journey with Cyberpunk has been that I don't like Witcher 3. And I never played Witcher 1 or 2. So I've never really held CDPR up the way that people do. Now I've always been the first one to say that me not liking The Witcher 3 is me. It's not everyone else is wrong and I'm right. I have no doubt that it's a really good game. I've just started it up and tried to play it two, three, maybe four different times, gotten an hour or two into it every time and just couldn't care less. And just just do not care, don't like the way it feels. I'm not into like kind of magic-y, medieval-y kind of stuff. That's just not my genre. And it just never stuck with me. I just don't think it's like the game of the generation everyone else says it is. I think that's Red Dead 2 for sure. Obviously that's a controversial pick as well. Maybe we can talk about that another time. So with CDPR and with Cyberpunk 2077, I remember that trailer from back in the day, but I never really thought twice about it until the conference when Keanu came out and did the, you're beautiful, or whatever, you're breathtaking. That's what it was. When I saw it, what was so funny about it, and I promise, if you go back and see any tweets I made or anything over the years, this game, ever since they revealed it a couple years ago, actual gameplay, has just screamed Division 1 hype to me ever since. And even in the last few months, even before the delays, but especially after the delays, all I could think about was, man, this game's gonna get Division 1 so hard. And by that, if you don't know what I mean that when Division's first trailer debuted back in 2013, it looked like it was gonna be this like super duper immersive, super duper deep, super duper detailed game set in New York City, and this like giant version of New York City that included like Brooklyn and all the surrounding areas. And then Division 1 came out and it was big and it did have depth. But it wasn't 50% of what people thought it was going to be, right? Not to mention all the issues with the game. And so in the lead up to Cyberpunk, there's just been and obviously the fandom of The Witcher 3 really got people hyped too. They're like, wow, this is the same people who made Witcher 3, which to me is the best game ever, at least on this gen. And that means that this Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be even better because they're going to take everything they know from that and go bigger, but then the delays kept happening, and there's been a lot of talk about issues with how they treat their employees, and that is obviously a controversial topic because depending on how big of a fan you are of them, it seems like people kind of go back and forth on whether the things they do are normal or whether they are worse than other studios, or even if it is normal, if it's still a bad thing. That is what it is. So then Cyberpunk starts sending out review codes, and this was a couple days before, or like a week before the game came out. And I remember specifically that there were a few reviewers who were coming out and being like, "Oh yeah, I got my PC code. I'm playing. My review will be out soon." And then that time came where their embargo was up and they were allowed to talk. And one of the weird things to a lot of people that was getting pointed out was, hey, they actually only sent us a PC code, and so we don't. So here's my review on the PC version, but we don't know what the console version is like. And if you remember, if you followed this, this last delay, the last 3 or 4 week delay they said specifically was to try to get the consoles into a better state before they released the game. But even after that, they still didn't let anyone see what that meant. So the early reviews come out, and it's 9s and 10s across the board for the most part. There were a few dissenting voices that gave it, I think, like 6s and 7s. Many of them mentioning mostly tons of bugs, some game breaking, but then also kind of talking about some stuff that I'll also get at. So then the game comes out for everyone, including people on the OG, the PS4 and the Xbox One, as well as the One X, PS4 Pro, and the new PS5 and Series X/S. And that's when shit hit the fan is probably the best way to put it. So you've probably seen this, but I'm trying to recap as quickly as I can. So basically, the OG PS4 and Xbox Ones just don't run the game at acceptable frame rates, and I mean they legit look like PS3 or 360 games. I mean it's bad, and I know there may even be someone who listens to this, or I know I've seen it on Twitter where you'll have some random person be like, "I'm playing on my release PS4 and it's perfect." So that's awesome. If someone is, not being just a fanboy, and if someone is genuinely feels that way, that experience that they're getting is great, then that's fine. The problem is that, from Digital Foundry and lots of other people who, do a lot of these performance tests on games and stuff, with the PS4, you're looking at like 720p and like 20 to 25 FPS, sometimes dipping below that. On the Xbox One, you're talking about sometimes not even 720p. I think it drops down to like 680 at times. And you're talking about like 20 FPS, and you're talking about it dropping down to almost to the tens, to the teens. And that's just objectively bad. And there's just no, there's not really any arguing against that. If that's all you know, and you've only played consoles, you've never played, and you've never had a One X or the new systems, or I still, even then, I think that you're kind of fooling yourself if you're really telling people that you think that's a good experience, those stats. But beyond that, it seems like the biggest issues with those OG consoles is the fact that like the load in, and I mean the hitching and stuff on Xbox especially is literally like there's footage of where someone turns a corner and the game just hitches for a minute, and then you can move again, and then it hitches again. And so where a lot of the issues have come from is that there was kind of there's this feeling, and it seems pretty correct at this point, they didn't give out console codes because if they did, their Metacritic score would get tanked. Now, to be fair, Metacritic does the platform separately, so PC would have been separate from Xbox One and separate from Xbox Series X. But anyways, there's accusations that they hid this on purpose because they knew how bad it was, despite that last 3-4 week delay. And then there was also an issue with the reviews where even for the PC codes they sent out before release day, they did not allow reviewers to use the reviewer's own footage. They were only allowed to use the canned footage they were sent by CDPR. And what's kind of funny in hindsight is that obviously the majority of people were just excited to see and to put out new content for this game that's been so anticipated. But there were a few voices. I believe ACG, Skill Up, as well as a few other people, and even some of the people who did reviews were like, this review only reflects the PC version. We don't know about the console because we haven't played it yet. And Skill Up and ACG, I think straight up, didn't put out reviews because of those limitations, at least not yet. Or if they did it after release. And what's interesting is that so now we know that the OG consoles are awful. The One X and the PS4 Pro are decent. Like they definitely run it better. And then the PS5 and Series X they're running the old versions, but because they're so much more beefy, they're running them pretty consistently and fairly well. So what's interesting is that, the overall narrative, especially from kind of more the fanboy side and people who are liking the game, is, oh, they're going to fix the bugs. They're going to fix, they'll make performance a little bit better on those old systems as best as it can be. But it's a really great game and I'm having fun. But then as you start, as the days have passed and as you're starting to see some more in-depth reviews and stuff like that, the picture that's kind of being painted is, the bugs and stuff suck, but those will get fixed. The issue now is kind of shifting to this thing of, well, there's a couple things. One, that it's really starting to look like this wasn't just like a whoopsie kind of thing, like, oops, we didn't know it was going to be that bad. It was more of like oh, we super knew it was awful, but we really need to make money. So please ignore, back when we said, when we posted the release date as when it's ready, because, I'm sure they're deleting those tweets as we speak. The other issue is that there's a bunch of stuff just missing from the game. Even if you're talking about, people with a 3090 and the newest processor and, these beefy machines, there's lots and lots of bugs, even in the PC version. They'll be fixed, but they're pretty bad. Especially it seems like in the later missions, and I'll explain that in a minute. But there's things that go on in the game where, like, even in the highest, fidelity, you have lots of, like, of the random NPCs are like clones of each other, and they're walking around. They're kind of, it's very Truman Show-esque, where games like Red Dead, even old Grand Theft Auto, even games like Watch Dogs and stuff, Assassin's Creed, where these games have done a pretty good job of making it feel like you're in, like, kind of like a living world, and you're just existing along with all of these other people who are existing. um Cyberpunk has a very big feeling of, like, everyone's just there for you and only reacting to you. The NPCs all have, like, one line that they'll use when they're interacted with. A lot of the canned animations and canned, like, situations that happen around you will happen over and over and over and over again. One specific example is there's like a food machine, and someone will be standing at it, and a reviewer I was watching said that he's like, oh, this is a unique piece of dialogue that this man's having at this machine. I bet if I hang out, like, a quest will come up, like, where the machine is gonna, like, blow up and kill him, and it'll just be something funny to see. And instead it was just that NPC repeating the same line over and over again endlessly. There's issues like the in the old trailers and then some of the Night City things. It seemed like there was supposed to be this kind of, like, wanted system, or this police system of bounties and stuff like that, when what it really is if you do something bad, the police spawn in behind you, and then if you run away 100 meters, they just stop looking for you. They don't chase you. There's no system for that. So if you do something bad, they instantly pop in behind you. They don't, like, even in, like, old Grand Theft Auto games and stuff, like, the police pull up, they get out of their cars, the ambulances show up, like, there's like a whole, fire trucks. That's like a whole big thing. In this game, it's literally out of thin air. Their cars pop up and they pop up outside their cars, and that's how police work. There's a good example of this where someone found a really secluded area, and I think, like, pushed an NPC into it, where it was like at the top of a building on the edge of the building. So there was no police around. There was nothing. There's no one around. And then they shot the NPC in the head and killed him. And then they spun around, and there's police everywhere and in cars on top of this building. So it's systems like that I think people were expecting this to be this, like, layer upon layer, super deep game. On the other hand, even from me, my own experience from watching a lot, and just from other people's reviews, it seems like people like the story well enough. They like the characters, that the voice acting is mostly good. There's definitely some lower parts, but that's going to happen in giant games like this. Like, it seems like people are enjoying the game. It's just that the game isn't what they were expecting, and not what they felt like they were being sold for these so many years. And for me, I actually ended up canceling my pre-order. Shroud and Dr. Lupo both had early access, and those are two of the main streamers I watch now. I kind of just don't have time to watch many others, and they're the ones I just prefer. And after watching, so at this point, either through VODs or live while I was at work or at night after everyone goes to bed, I've watched both of their playthroughs, like 85% of their playthroughs, but definitely the beginning and definitely the end. I think I missed a little bit in the middle for both of them. And what was interesting to me, and the reason I canceled my pre-order, is that even them on, obviously, I mean, Lupo has literally a 3 PC brand new streaming setup. Shroud has I'm sure he has the 3090 and all the fancy all the fancy gadgets and tech, and even them, like, literally you can watch either one of their VODs or streams for an hour on this game and just see, I mean, borderline countless bugs and issues. And Not all of them are game breaking, but some of them are, and they definitely ran into multiple ones. And the thing I noticed big time was that in the final mission, quote unquote, it doesn't even look like that mission went through QA. Like, and it probably didn't. I suspect that they were hoping that they would be able to maybe do some bug fixing and stuff before most people got to that point. Obviously, these streamers are gonna get there within a couple days because they're streaming all day. I think Shroud did like a 14-hour stream or longer. He might have even been on for longer. I think Lupo did too. So I just, but even what they've said, what a lot of reviews are starting to kind of come out and talk about is that yeah, these bugs are awful, but those will get fixed. The performance blows, but that will get improved at least as much as it can. But that the game is really wide. There's a lot in the world, but it's about 6 inches deep. It's not there's not much depth, and that's a good comparison I've heard people say is that if the Cyberpunk was CDPR's first game, and then they made The Witcher 3, it would be like, oh wow, they made a good game, and then they made an amazing game. But the issue that it seems like a lot of the reviewers are having, and a lot of players are having, is that it seems like they've actually taken a pretty big step back. And whether that was because of the delays, whether that was because of whatever reason, is that they didn't improve, and in fact, in a lot of ways, from a gameplay perspective, they regressed. And I think that's what's upset people so much. It's made me super pumped that I didn't buy it. I got my money back when I could. And then definitely CDPR's response since then has been rough. They've not really helped themselves. They've been kind of, there's a lot of people who are maybe a little too big of fans of them who are saying things like, oh, well fans made them release it. People got mad that they delayed it, but now they put it out and they're mad that it's not, in good shape. You can be both. It's okay to be upset that they, set a date and then didn't meet it. And then, you're upset that it didn't come out when you wanted it to. And then you can also be upset that when it comes out, it's not what you expected, and it's in a lot of ways bad. And what always happens in these situations, whether it's video games or even like, creators, I've seen a lot of that lately too, when what happens a lot is that, people trot out like, oh, well, people are treating the devs, directly, they're giving them death threats, or even when it happens to a creator, like, well, this creator got a death threat from some asshole. That's the worst. That's awful. No one should get death threats or anything. The devs specifically, the individual developers, absolutely did the best they possibly could in this situation. I have no doubt in my mind that until that last minute, and even after, I'm sure today, there's devs crunching right now to work on patches and stuff like that. So those people, individuals, absolutely don't deserve to be berated and attacked. And I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of them, or the vast majority of feedback, isn't going directly to those people. Some of it is, and some of it's awful, and that sucks. But that doesn't negate the fact that CDPR and their upper management and their executives and just them as a entity absolutely deserve all of the shit they're getting and more, in my opinion, for sure. So there's this weird game that gets played where it seems like people who, maybe are a little more kind or a little more willing to accept what maybe they shouldn't are the first people to say, like, or have even seen other, developers or other publishers talk about it, being like, well, people are going after the devs and that's not okay. And I think most reasonable people would say that's true. People shouldn't go after the devs. They're doing their best. But that doesn't negate all the bullshit. And that's a big thing that's happening right now. There's recently an issue with a couple creators who have been featured on a bunch of different platforms lately. And there's some people who were accusing them of only getting attention for particular reasons, that they were promoting themselves as well. And that particular thing it's stupid. It's stupid to get mad about that. There's no story there. But the problem is that the individual creators were really not helping themselves with their way they were acting and reacting and things like that. And so there's this, there's these situations where like we can multitask, we can appreciate what devs have done or what creators do or stand for, and also call out the bullshit when there's bullshit going on, and that's okay to do both. It's not an either or situation, and it's okay to like Cyberpunk. You should. From what I've seen, it's a really great game, but it's not what they said it was going to be, and in fact, it's a lot worse with the bugs and stuff. But even when those things get fixed, this game still has a lot to be desired, and it's missing a lot of stuff that it shouldn't after all this time and all this promise. And that's where I'll leave it. Okay, 34 minutes into the show, and we are just getting to Division stuff. So Division 2. So title update 12 came out fairly recently. I did not do a podcast last week because I really hadn't had much time to play TU12 yet. So I wanted to wait. So I'm going to save any spoiler stuff for the Division 3 part. So don't worry about that with Viper. But I'm going to talk about that Manhunt. So for TU12, so the big change is obviously the new gear and stuff like that. There's the new gear set, which I actually haven't messed with, or the new brand. I've seen them. I've been kind of speculating and watching videos and stuff. They seem like they have use, both of them. But man, I'm a hardwired pony. I just, that's my build. But I may need to expand my my outlook a little bit. What I will say is that some of the new guns, the freaking named PDR is my favorite gun in this game now. That has perfectly in sync on a assault rifle. I use that along with the Harmony on my hardwired build now, and it is dope. It does so much damage. It is so fun. I actually did get the exotic from doing the summit challenges. And I can, like, it's one of those things where I look at the exotic and I'm like, that gun is great. Like, I should be using that. And I'm not, just because I like the name version so much. Is it like test subject or something? I forget what it's called. So yeah, new gear, especially new guns. I'm a big fan. They're dope. The summit, the changes to that. So I dove in a little bit, and messed around with it. I think I've gotten up to like level 30 or something. That's how I did my project and got my challenges done to get the new exotic PDR. And I like it. You know, at this point, the summit for me, all it's really missing is just some more variety in the different floors. I honestly think I was farming assault rifles there to try to get assault rifle, a few more assault rifles with the things I like. And you can get an epic crap ton of gear drops between the challenges, between all the different things on there now. It's a great place to farm, specifically because you can pick what drops. That's pretty dope. Again, I still think that the actual levels are kind of whatever. I don't like some of the phases that you go through, some of the like the EMPs and stuff like that. I don't love some of the things in there. I haven't messed with the modifiers yet, so I'm gonna do that with some of the challenges soon. I typically don't like those things, but I'll mess with them. But the summit, I think the summit is now where they probably wanted it to be when they released it. I still thought the summit wasn't going to come until after the last Manhunt. When we heard about the summit, I just assumed it was going to come in like March, after I think the game is basically done, as this, here's this last thing to do. I don't know why they put it out, because they obviously put it out early. It obviously wasn't done because they've already had two pretty major updates to it. So, but the summit in TU12, I think it's a nice place to go grind. Throw on a podcast, throw on something, throw on this podcast, and just play. It's not overly. I play on challenging. I've thought about doing some heroic or legendary, but I just kind of like having fun when I'm playing this game at this point. I'm not trying to get that sweaty, but if you want to, go nuts. The Viper bounty. These bounties are the same thing, basically. These rogues. You do all your tasks and then you do your bounty and then it's over. It was actually kind of funny. The first time I faced Viper, it's in the southwest region, which is actually in the southeast of the map. The bounties always spawn in that far, 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 far east place, the first place that we saw Black Tusk during the World Tiers. And they always spawn over there, and I hate that spot for bounties. because there's no easy way to get to it. You always have to run through like 15 different mobs to get to it, and it's a nightmare. So the first time I tried to fight Viper, I ended up making the wrong move and getting killed in the final fight that's on the outside of that building. And then the next one, I was in the what I thought was the second to last stage of the bounty, only to realize that this time Viper spawned inside, and I killed her and didn't even know it. So, I mean, these bounties are what they are with the Manhunt. They aren't really that interesting gameplay wise. They're just like a normal bounty, but it's fine. But the comms were a big highlight here. But I'm going to save that for the Division 3 talk because it applies there. The one thing I will talk about here, though, that is a bit of a spoiler, heads up, is that Viper, the character, her dad is the guy who is runs our shooting range in the White House. So this is one of those things where, like, I kind of wish that maybe they address that. The fact that now, after that Viper portion is over, now we go to the White House and we test out our guns, and we're getting like side eye from this dude who, I don't know, we just murdered his daughter. But I'll talk more about that in a moment, and why there's another part of what we learned from Viper that I think may have something to do with Division 3. But I'll speculate on that in a moment. The other big thing that did happen shortly after TU12 was that they did put out a fix for the Memento backpack. People, of course, found a way to cheese PvP, go figure, by basically figuring out a way to make Memento to get a bunch of tokens without actually killing people, and just have like hilarious armor and stuff like that. It has been fixed, and they actually fixed it pretty darn quickly, which I think is awesome. And this first TU12 kind of leads me into a quick discussion of what I think is left for Division 2. I've been kind of bringing up Division 3 a lot and things like that. And I've been thinking a lot more about like what's actually going to happen with 2, because if a Division 3 is coming, I would guess it was originally slated for March of 2022. But with the COVID delays and stuff like that, you really have to wonder, like, is that still realistic? Is there a chance that maybe it's been pushed back, if it's coming, to a November 2022? Please remember that Division 1 was originally intended to come out in November of 2015. And then it got delayed back to March. Again, parallels to Cyberpunk. I'm just throwing it out there. So, or even potentially Division 3 could be pushed back a whole year at this point, back to 2023. And so what would that mean for Division 2? So what I think is going to happen, I still think that there's probably a 2022 release date for Division 3 if it's currently in development. But what I think that's going to mean is, I've seen speculation and some people even saying that, they've heard that there's like a season 5. I haven't heard that, and I think I would have. I think season 4 is it. And what I think is probably going to happen, if you think about it, these seasons have run for since from March till January, February, from March to February, basically a whole year. What I think is going to happen is that they'll figure out a way to rerun the seasons starting in like May or something, or even April. And the reason I think that could work is because I think that would very likely lead to a potential March or April or sometime in 2022 release of the next game. I would hope that they would do some kind of system like what they did with Division 1, where they had the shield system. I hope if they do something, it's a lot more interesting than the shields, because those ended up being kind of a dud, in my opinion. Only my own, of course. But I think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to see them run back through the seasons again, that you can play it all again. Maybe they'll throw in some extra rewards or something, but with them having the optimization station and the best way to get materials for that being from the seasons and the manhunts and the events, it only makes sense to me that even after season 4 is over, the best way to keep giving people ways to keep using that optimization station is to keep running seasons. And I don't believe that they're going to run a season 5, 6, 7, 8. I think this is it. A big part of it too actually came out. I saw it today, where someone who I don't believe is with Massive anymore, but was talked about how this the Fei Lao story that's happening is the last narrative thing they did with Division 2. And so maybe they left Massive before they could work on more seasons or whatever. But I'm going to guess that they finished that and then they were done with Division 2 and they've since moved on. So that's just my guess. That's what I'm thinking. I think that we're going to run through the seasons again. I hope they throw in some cool stuff. I do have some speculation about some division related things that may happen in 2021, but I'm going to try to mostly keep that under wraps because I don't want to mislead people. I'm not trying to make some clickbait videos and make up fake NDA letters and stuff like that. So I'm not doing that. Now on that topic, let's jump into the Division 3 speculation room. So my typical start here is during the last podcast, I believe I said that there were 15 jobs listed on Massive's website. There's now 16. So I couldn't figure out exactly which one was new. I couldn't remember what the old ones were. I want to say, I think there's a brand specialist for a unannounced project. My guess is that I think that was the new one. I feel like I recognize the other ones, but maybe I'm wrong. Again, I mean, Massive has Snowdrop, they have Uplay, they have Avatar, and they have what appears to be a pretty tiny team still working on Division 2. So they're hiring a bunch of people for an unannounced project. I think the logical guess is that that's a Division 3 because they're working on Avatar and Division 3. Those are their two main IPs. From back when I read David Polfelt's book, their whole vision for Massive is to have their own engine, Snowdrop, and have two big IPs to work on, Avatar and The Division. I don't see them adding a third IP. I don't think that they are hiring all these people to make a Division 2 update. The hiring they're doing and a bunch of their partner studios who worked on Division 2 are also hiring. It just seems logical, but I could be wrong. They may be working on another World in Conflict game or something else. Who knows? There is a slight possibility they have a third IP because up until recently, there were a bunch of job postings for a Massive Stockholm, which I believe is like a smaller studio associated with Massive that's across the bay or whatever from them. So there may be, but I would imagine that would be like a AA project or something smaller. But we'll have to see. It could be a support studio for whatever they're doing, like a potential Division 3. We'll have to wait and see. Because there were never any NDAs or anything involved here, I was actually contacted about doing a playtest of something for Red Storm. Through Red Storm. It, in theory, could be for any of their studios. It was supposed to happen, and then it didn't. And I know a few other people who have been contacted about the playtest who also said that it didn't happen for them. So my guess is that something happened to whatever game was going to get tested and they canceled it entirely. They didn't notify us of that. I emailed them to try to get some kind of answers and never got a response. So because I didn't actually see what we were supposed to test, and I don't know anything about what it was, what I can say is that there was some stuff that led me to believe it's Division related. Maybe it's for like a big DLC. I can't imagine if they're working on a Division 3 right now, there's no way they already have like play testable, especially like for outside eyes. There's no way it's for something like that. So I don't know. I think that's something worth keeping an eye on, though. And then the last bit is actually some of the spoilers from Viper, which I assume most people who are listening to this have already completed that bounty. But one of the little details that I think may end up mattering for a Division 3 is that Viper is a Black Tusk operative, and that's why she's working with Faye in this manhunt. But we find out through the comms that she's actually she's actually a Division agent. She's not technically rogue though, because she is now because she's in the manhunt, but technically she's not because she was never activated. And she actually talks about that and how she was waiting to be activated and she never was. So far we know of two big waves of activation. The first wave, which like Aaron Keener was part of, and a bunch of other agents. We only know about the first wave agents really from Division 1 in New York City. In the book, in the comic, we get some elaboration on other, agents that were activated at first. And then we know there was a wave 2 of agents released, which included our agent in Division 1. In theory, our agents in Division 2. See, the thing in Division 2 is really you can make up your own backstory for your agent. Starting with that opening scene somewhere in the Northeast. Your agent in Division 2 could be an agent that survived the first wave or was activated in the second. It's up to you, in my opinion. What's interesting to know is that I assumed that the second wave activation was activating the rest, was activating all of them. In the art book for Division 2, it actually goes pretty deep into the bureaucracy and the organization of Shade and the division, and to realize that there is like an upper echelon of leadership. My only issue is that we see basically none of that in the game. In the art book, it talks about there being like, you have like there's even different divisions in the division. There's like an R&D part of the division that creates all these crazy tech, much of it what we saw down in the DARPA labs. And then there's like a whole leadership thing that goes up to the president. And one thing I really hope that maybe they elaborate on at some point is like pointing out that there are like lieutenants, and they're, even though the agents are supposed to be kind of on their own, they're like individual operators. In theory, there is leadership. But we've not really seen any of that. I think even Manny in Division 2 was just a JTF guy they pulled in to help. And then Fei Lao in the first game was just an agent that had to take over leadership when the leader got killed by the LMB in that rocket attack on his Osprey. So they've kind of never really made it super clear that there actually is a leadership structure. And what I think is interesting about that little tidbit about Viper is what that tells me is that she probably wasn't the only not activated agent left in the world, right? So I'm curious to if a potential Division 3 or something could toy with the idea of like, well, there might still be a whole nother third of the agents left who aren't activated yet and are still waiting. And it would make sense that they haven't been activated, because after the Wave 2 agents were activated, I imagine that's around the same time that Ellis took over, after the president and the vice president, quote unquote, died. And if Ellis was in the pockets of Black Tusk and was, conniving things, then why would he would never say to activate the rest of the agents. Why would he want more Shade agents? So I'm kind of curious about what like a Division 3 could look like, and there's a few possibilities in my opinion. So again, these are season 4 spoilers. I'll try not to go into too much detail, but long story short, I think that the end of season 4 is going to end with the agents potentially all being marked rogue. And what could be interesting about the fact that all of these agents are not activated yet is that in theory, all of the existing agents could get marked rogue for plot reasons. And whoever takes over, whoever the president is, could say, well, hey, we still have more agents. Let's activate them so they can fight off all these rogue agents that, are bad or whatever. So I'm wondering if that may be where this is going. But the fact that they've made clear to us that there are a bunch of agents that are, trained division agents that are not currently activated. There has to be something going on there. So I really hope they elaborate on that. Okay. So for listener questions, I don't have any this week. I didn't see any. I may have missed some, but let me know on Twitter, YouTube, during my streams. You can email me. Check out my Discord where I have a room just for questions. Feel free to ask me questions or speculate things or throw out your ideas and I can talk about them, what I think of them. Please do it. I love that interaction. As for content updates, streams and the podcast may be a bit weird for the next couple of weeks because we do have Christmas coming up, New Year's. My wife will be home. She's a teacher, so she's off that whole time, which means that the little one will also be here the whole time. And I'll be a little busier than normal during the week. So I'll do what I can. Hopefully with streams, I can actually stream maybe a little bit more. It'll probably mostly be in the mornings, Eastern time. And so just don't be surprised. There's also the factor of I don't know if there's really going to be any information for me really to talk about for the games industry. These next few weeks is pretty much dead time. Like I said, the Massive employees and Massive is shutting down after this current week, and they'll be done for a couple weeks. So there won't even be any like stupid things I can speculate on, more than likely. So, and there probably won't be much until the next day of the game or until the next Manhunt, which is still like 2 weeks away. So I will update as needed or as I can, but just know that there's a decent chance there won't be another podcast for another week or two. And that's it. I am Bon Diesel on Twitch, where I try to stream 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. I am on Twitter as @BonDiesel, or my Division only channel @TheEchoCast. If you want some cool EchoCast or Bon Diesel merch, check out designbyhumans.com/shop/BonDiesel. That's all I have. So until next time.